All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to MFCA's monthly workshop. This is the January workshop on the legal rights and responsibilities for Muslim refugee kids that we all serve. And we are truly excited and happy to have on board Amy Doukoure of CARE, Michigan. If you're not aware of Amy, she's actually everywhere here in Michigan. I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction, and then we'll get started after that. She has a great presentation for us today on this topic. So Amy is a graduate of Wayne State University. She's got a degree in English language arts. Prior to obtaining her her JD, Juris Doctor, Mrs. Doukoure worked for over 10 years as an educator in the Detroit area. Many of those years were spent teaching general studies at many of the area's Islamic schools, and she went on to obtain her Juris Doctorate from the University of Detroit Mercy, the School of Law at Detroit Mercy. And while at the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law, she was the president and one of the founding members of the Muslim Student Lawyers Association. So that was fantastic. And that's got a lot of people, be able to do many great things as a result of that. Amy then is passionate about community service. And prior to attending law school, she worked on many public service projects and successfully wrote for grants to open up a soup kitchen in the Brightmoor community in Northwest Detroit. And after graduating from law school, Amy engaged in several internships focused on public service and civil rights, including working as a pro bono legal associate for the Detroit Center for Family Advocacy and an internship with the ACLU of Detroit. So we're happy to have her here, and I'm so glad you're all here to join us in this wonderful presentation. Thank you, Amy, for presenting for us today.
Thank you, Sean. I'm so glad to be here. So one of the things that about my bio that I think is important for everybody to know is I worked as a pro bono attorney for the Detroit Center for Family Advocacy. And that was really my first introduction into foster care and the legal aspect of foster care work. That, for those of you who don't know, that agency was specifically, their mission was specifically to keep children out of foster care by assisting with direct family placements and oftentimes non-custodial parent placement. So if one parent was engaged in the Child Protective Services system, Detroit Center for Family Advocacy would work to get them placed with the non-custodial parent to keep them out of foster care. So foster care work and working with children who are vulnerable is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. So I just wanted to say that. So I respect everything that everybody's doing and understand the difficult job that you guys have at hand, honestly. So I'm gonna share my screen, and we're gonna kind of go through. If I can, there we go. We're going to go through like a little presentation, and I know there were questions that were brought up, so I'm going to try to cover them as I go through the slides. So today we're going to talk about the religious rights of children who are in foster care. Specifically, I know a lot of what we're going to be talking about affects like our Afghan unaccompanied refugee minors that are placed here in Michigan, mostly on the west side of the state. So we're going to talk a little about where we get our rights from, how our rights apply to minors, because they apply similarly, but also in some different ways to minors, and how state government action and foster care kind of interact. So this is our agenda for today. I do want to encourage people, if you have questions, drop them in the chat and we can answer them as well. So all of our rights that we're going to be talking today come from the U.S. Constitution, really the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, and which says that it prohibits the government from restricting religious rights or expression. And expression, and the difference is, the difference between belief and expression means that you are allowed to believe whatever you believe as an individual religiously, but the expression of that really looks like how our religious beliefs affect our outward life, right? Like the wearing of the headscarf for Muslim women, that would be religious expression. Praying before meals, that's religious expression. So all of those things that sort of the public can see when it comes to our religion, that's what we consider to be religious expression. But it also prohibits any government agency from entering into an official religion, or what we would consider to be state-sponsored religion. And that really has two prongs. The establishment prong really means like the state of Michigan can't say, hey, we're all about to be Catholic today. Everybody in Michigan has to follow the Catholic Bible. They can't do that. But what it also does is it means that when you are a state or the government or an actor who's acting on behalf of the state or the government, you can't, express through policy, through practices, a preference for one religion over another. All of those policies and the practices and the customs of the state, the government, the agency, they have to be religiously neutral. They can't tend to promote one religion, and they can't tend to disfavor another religion. So that's how how we see the establishment clause working in foster care, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that as we go on. And then we have the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, and this is the Equal Protection Clause. And this is means that every person, regardless of where they are, whether they're a U.S. citizen, whether they're a lawful permanent resident, or whether they have no legal status in the United States, if they are found inside your state, so the state of Michigan for most of us, or maybe all of us, then they have to be treated just as equals as everybody else. And this specifically means the states, the individual states, Michigan, Ohio, Tennessee, all of the 50 of them have to treat each citizen of the state, which is not the same as citizen of the country, but each person found in their state who's domiciled there, with equal treatment under the law. And that means the First Amendment and the Establishment Clause. And that's one of the great things I think about our Constitution, is that it protects individuals. It doesn't protect just U.S. citizens. So no matter what your status is, you have the same rights. So how does this affect legal rights of minors? Because we know, and you guys know, like, minors are not, they're not born fully intact with all of their intellect and things like that in place. So how they interact with the world sometimes is different. Like, parents can restrict certain things and they can give certain types of education to their children, and that's the parents' rights. So how does that like work when they're in foster care? So for all intents and purposes, minors enjoy all of the same protections of the U.S. Constitution as every other person found inside the United States. They have the right to freedom of religion. They have the right to remain silent when they're encountered by law enforcement. They have all of those rights completely and fully and independently from their parents and from whoever is their like legal guardian, with the exception of the right to vote. They're not allowed to vote till they're 18. So the other way, so minors enjoy their own set of rights, right? So they have First Amendment rights, which means they have the right to believe how they want to believe about religion and practice the way that their sincerely held religious beliefs tell them they should be practicing. And they are able to bring actions on their own, like through the court system or other like administrative agencies, to protect those rights. But also their rights, something unique about our Constitution too, is that minors enjoy reciprocal rights of their parents because of the parent-child relationship. So if a child is being discriminated against, because of their national origin or their race, for instance, a parent can bring an action on their behalf. And I think it's important to understand that this reciprocal right remains intact even when children are in foster care. Because the nature of foster care agency is like a quasi governmental system where the foster care agencies are acting as local parentis instead of the state of Michigan. So the state of Michigan actually has custody of the children, and then that is acted out through the local foster care placing agencies. So they're actually government actors. So even though a person might find themselves in foster care, a child, for instance, that doesn't mean that their parents don't like lose those rights to them. They have those reciprocal rights of the minor children that they gave birth to or that they're the biological parent of, until the state says that they don't through a termination proceeding. And that's regardless of how they came into foster care, whether they came in as, the result of a child protective service agency action or even as a refugee. And it's important to know that there are a lot of state and federal laws that give specific rights to minor, especially those that are in foster care. And we'll talk about some of those laws as it pertains to the state of Michigan. So this is what I was just speaking about. So the way that I like to tell people your constitutional rights are not self-actualizing. Like they don't just come to fruition because they exist in the Constitution. So the Senate, the Congress got together and they put together 42, we call it USC 1983, which is a civil action for deprivation of rights. And this is how we would protect our rights. You can bring a federal lawsuit for the deprivation of a constitutional right against somebody who's acting as a state under the color of law, right? State child welfare departments and private agencies that contract with states for the placement of a child through foster care, or even when you're contracting with the federal government, in some cases when you're bringing in refugee minors, you are considered a state actor. Those children are actually in the custody of the state of Michigan because they're found in the state of Michigan, and your contract with the state of Michigan or the federal government gives you the right to act as a state actor. Therefore, foster care agencies are quasi-governmental entities when it comes to rights, which means they have an affirmative obligation to ensure that those children that they are, in charge of are really fully recognizing their religious rights and all of their constitutionally protected rights. And all states must consider when it comes to placing agencies. The federal government has says that the U.S. Foster care agencies, in order to continue with their federal funding, must consider the best interests of the children when they're choosing a foster home. So these are some of the ways in which the federal law interacts to protect our constitutional rights. And Michigan sets forth 12 factors that are best interest factors, and one of them is actually religion. Religion is recognized as a best interest factor in our child placing laws. So there are some Michigan specific laws that are important to understand. As a result of a Muslim family losing custody of their children and their children being given to a family that then converted them to Christianity and changed their names, Michigan enacted what's called Amr's Law, for Rehab and Ahmed Amr, that requires that child placing agencies place the child in the most family-like setting available and in as close proximity to the children's home and consistent with the child's best interest. So what this means is that if you have, say, for instance, a child that comes into care and he's an Afghan refugee minor, and you have a community of Afghan individuals that speak Dari, right? Because that's that's one of the primary languages of our Afghan refugee minors. We should be placing those, if there are available foster homes within that community, we should be placing within that community because they're going to have the same culture as where the child is coming from, pretty much. They're going to have the language that the child is coming from. It's going to be the most home-like setting that's possible inside the United States for these children that are coming from outside the United States. And then if that's not possible, we should be looking to the next best option, somebody who shares the same faith with them or in close proximity. This allows for close proximity to that religion, like that community. So if there's a large pocket of Afghan individuals or Muslim individuals that they can then be close to, go to school with children that have these same shared values, that's kind of what we should be looking for. And that's what Amr's Law requires. It requires that children are not coming in as a refugee, right? We talk about like a trauma-centered care and taking the child's needs into consideration. We have somebody coming in as a refugee from a foreign country. They're coming in usually as a result of something traumatic, right? Like the removal, like the Afghan war, the removal of the US troops, which led to complete destabilization over there. So they're already traumatized and they're leaving everything that's familiar to them, their homeland, their language, their food, their religion, everything behind. So it is in their best interest that when they come over here, that they have some of that consistency, that they have, a religion that's familiar to them, food that's familiar to them, language that's familiar to them. And this law really recognizes that. And how we effectuate that is that each child, and you guys know this, but each child that's placed in foster care, they have a LGAL, a lawyer guardian ad litem, that speaks with the child, and they look at the circumstances, and they are tasked only with determining what they believe is in the best interest of the child, and then promoting that with the court. And sometimes, depending on the age of the child, they can also promote the preference of the child with the court as well. But what we see sometimes with refugee children, especially, is that they don't understand what the LGAL is there for. It's just another adult in their life, somebody that they don't know and they don't trust. Sometimes there's a communication barrier because of a language barrier. So they don't really know how to address that. And that's something that, you know, as placing agencies and as foster care workers that are working individually with those children, we should be fostering, you know, that understanding. And that's a way that we can help, you know, our foster children really assert their own rights and their own needs, is by, you know, explaining to them what the LGIL is and fostering and developing that relationship. And then also, the state of Michigan must accord a child's parents a great deal of deference in making child-rearing decisions, even when they're in foster care, and even if the child is in foster care as a result of abuse or neglect, until the parents' rights are terminated. And this is true of refugee minors too. If the refugee minor is in touch with the parents, and that means the foster care agency has the ability to be in touch with those same parents. And we should be, you know, discussing with parents, you know, the need for medical care, the ability of medical care, dental care, religious needs and things like that, and taking their preference into consideration, and weighing all of the factors to determine whether what the parent needs and wants is in line with what's, you know, possible over here, but also like whether that's in the best interest of the children. And we should be, you know, giving them that deference as well, because the law requires us to do so. So what are the responsibilities of the foster care placing agencies? So because the parents are not able to make day-to-day decisions, you know, for each of the people that are in their care, that really turns on the, you know, the foster care placing agency and the foster parent themselves. So the judgment of the parents, the biological parents, are kind of replaced by the foster care agency. So, but they have to do it in a way that respects the needs of each individual child that's in their care. And for what we are talking about today, that means that also includes their religious needs. And, you know, the foster care placing agency has a legal obligation to allocate resources that will manage, you know, the religious, educational needs and spiritual needs of the foster care children, whether they're refugee Muslims or if they're just Muslims that are in foster care as a result of abuse or neglect. So that means that means we're talking about, you know, boys that have reached a certain age, they have an obligation to go to the masjid for Friday prayers. It's incumbent upon, you know, Muslim men who've reached maturity, which usually is between 14 and 16. And like Islamically, we understand that that's generally the age. And once they've reached the age of maturity, they are responsible for going to the masjid every Friday for our religious congregational prayer. So some schools, if there's a large Muslim population, they take care of that by having that congregational prayer in the school. But if you're in an area where that's not possible, then the foster care agency should be, you know, arranging for and providing transportation of these Muslim children, especially the older boys and girls, to attend the Friday prayers. We should be ensuring that that our foster children are not exposed to things in the home that are, you know, inherently against like the religious requirements, like foster, if the family engages in eating, let's say pork, for instance, the foster children should not be forced to eat pork. There should be an alternative diet available to them, including an up to halal meat for those foster care children who, you know, have the understanding of Islam, like most mainstream Muslims do, that you can only eat meat that's slaughtered in a certain way. So halal meat should be made available to them. And then, you know, like when we're talking about alcohol and things like that, and there should be no alcohol used in cooking for Muslims, like, you know, things like that. And that's something that needs to happen with direct conversations. And I know there's a lot of discourse that goes back and forth between, you know, well, what are the rights of the parents, the foster parents, and how can we compel them to do these things when they're you know, maybe it's not like within their belief system. And, you know, what we have to say to that is that the law is very clear that the state is allowed to compel people who work for the state to make reasonable accommodations for religious preferences of their foster children. and at the direction of the legal parents to the foster children. It's when you work as a state actor, and you get paid by the state to take in these foster care children, it makes you like a quasi employee of the state. And then the state has the ability to compel you to do certain things, even if those things are a violation of your religion. And maybe those are conversations that could happen with foster parents before they take in a child. Like we should be having those conversations about like, you know, this is a Muslim child coming from a Muslim country, and these are the kinds of things that they're going to need in order to be safe and comfortable in your home. And this is your legal obligations. And what can, you know, the foster care agency, placing agency do to support that? And is there any discomfort from the individual parents in doing that? And we could be having those conversations ahead of time. And the other thing is if you have a parent, like a foster parent who you've placed a child with, and they have a very strong preference for a religion that's not Islam, you know, they cannot compel the children to go to religious services with them. And they should not be encouraging small children, enticing them through treats and the like to do that. You know, they have to either arrange for you know, babysitting during that time or some alternative activity during their, you know, worship time, or and if they can't do so, then that falls on the responsible of the agency to take on that responsibility for providing alternative resources for a child to engage in some activity, or maybe stay at home with a babysitter if they're not of age while the parent goes to church or the synagogue or what have you, as it relates to their religious needs. And this also includes like you know, Muslim girls of a certain age wear the religious head covering, as called a hijab, and they have a right to do so even in their foster parents' home. This is especially true if there's a male, a father figure, a male in the home, who's not their biological male. They're obligated to wear the scarf, and they should be allowed to do so. And those materials that are necessary should be made available to them in the home, and they shouldn't face repercussions from doing so. So that's kind of what the foster placing agency's responsibilities are. They're to ensure that all of these things are available within the home that they're placing. So I just went over some of the reasonable accommodations that that should be available. These are a minimal set of obligations that should be available to all Muslim children. As we come up on the month of Ramadan, which is the holy month, one of the holiest months for Muslims, the 30-day period. Islam runs on a lunar calendar, so the start and end of each month is can be, you know, a day before, a day after than what's predicted, depending on the actual sighting of the moon. And but it's a period of time where your Muslim children, Afghan refugee children, will be fasting from sun up to sundown. Right now, that's from about 7 a.m. until about 5:40. I think when Ramadan comes in, it'll be close to 8 o'clock by the end of Ramadan when we start eating again. So we should be making arrangements for children to observe the fast. And that means somebody has to make sure that there's food available to them in the morning so they can eat prior to the first prayer, and begin their fast. And then there's food available to them. Even, you know, if the family has like, I don't know how you guys grew up, but I grew up like everybody had to be home at 6 p.m. unless you were at work or at a sporting event for your school. We had to be home at 6 o'clock. We had to sit down and eat at the table at 6 o'clock as a family. It was a big thing in my family. If that's the case in the home, you know, that child should not be made to sit down and eat with everybody else, but also food needs to be available for them at the end of the day. You know, Muslims pray 5 times a day, but we have to have access to those things that we need to prayer. So prayer rugs, hijabs or head coverings, for those who don't observe the hijab daily. Even the small kids pray, they'll need a hijab to pray in, and dhikr beads, which are like a small string of beads that you can say like certain invocations on a certain amount of times. Providing halal meat in the home, providing transportation to Juma on Fridays. Religious holiday prayers are very important in celebrations. And especially it becomes mandatory for those who've reached the age of puberty. If there are youth programs at the masjid, we should be encouraging the children to take parts in that. If there's qiyams, which are like late night prayers, and they want to go, we should be encouraging, and people should be advocating for that so that they can, because these are all things that they'd be doing if they were living with their parents or living at home, and they would have the ability to do so. So those are things we need to make sure that we're providing them access to religiously appropriate materials and education resources, including Qurans, and like going to events in the Islamic community. Making provisions so that children remain at home, and making sure that we are placing children, and this one is so important, in homes that are open and welcome to accommodating children of the Muslim faith. And, you know, we understand that sometimes, you know, there's not a Muslim home available, but there is, if there is one, that would be ideal, right? But it, you know, and we understand that when we place children in Muslim children in homes of Christians or Jewish individuals, they might not know a lot about the Islamic faith, and that's fine as long as they're open to, you know, learning about it and understanding what the needs are and what's required of them, because really that's what's in the best interest of the child, is to have a placement where someone's going to understand their needs and be able to address them appropriately. So I think there were a couple of things that I did not touch on that were questions. I'm gonna open this back up because I can't see. There were, sorry, I'm not really good with the technology, so bear with me. There were a couple of questions that were submitted in advance. Some of them I covered in the presentation, but I just wanted to go over a couple. So someone had submitted a question in advance about cultural competence and how caseworkers can enhance their cultural competency. And I would say, first of all, attending this program is amazing and probably will do that for you. And also you have a great resource in Muslim Foster Care Association. Really, Muslim Foster Care Association was founded with the intention of fostering those types of information and that type of cultural competency for caseworkers and for agencies and for parents. I think we did a program like this for parents last year, foster parents who are housing Muslim refugee kids. So I think, you know, like really lean on Muslim Foster Care Association. They have a lot of materials, a lot of resources available for you. And that's important. So somebody asked a question about intersectionality, and intersectionality is a big one. So are there specific legal considerations when dealing with cases where the individual is both a refugee and a Muslim? So refugees have they have a specific set of needs, right? So their Muslim identity happens to be one of them, right? But when you come in as a refugee, there's a lot of like legal proceedings that you're going through with regards to immigration and things like that, and just understanding how that stress plays on the children, and seeing, you know, asking them and providing them resources to understand the process of being a refugee, knowing what they're entitled to, because there's some entitlements that refugees have that they might not know how to utilize. You know, understanding that a lot of these individuals hope that their parents can then come to the US under some form of immigration status, like refugees, to be reunited with them, and helping them understand the process of that and how they can advocate for that, I think is really, really, really good as well. And having people who are willing to have those open conversations about what are your concerns about being a refugee? What do you know? What do you not know? What do you know, what can we do to assist you in that? I think is a really, really good way to provide that extra support for their, you know, quote unquote refugee identity that, you know, we don't find in, you know, children that are here and in foster care for other reasons, right? So there was a question about community engagement. What strategies can caseworkers employ to engage with the Muslim community and build trust? So I think that's a very important question. I think most masjids are very, very open to having conversations with people. And a lot of the bigger masjids, I know at least in this area, they have somebody appointed to have those like quote unquote interfaith dialogues, or, you know, those need-based dialogues. So if you have a Muslim refugee or a Muslim foster care child in a specific area, or you have a bunch, you know, just go to the masjid, reach out to them, talk to them, find out what they got going on, find out, you know, what their perception of is of like what, you know, could enhance the child's life, right? And having and opening the dialogue and finding out what programs they might have available for the children of that age, right? Maybe they got a weekend school program. Maybe they have a Wednesday Arabic class or Quran recitation class. Maybe they got a youth program, like our masjid has a Friday basketball game, right? For high school boys. Maybe they have a Friday basketball game where the Muslim boys can go get together and, you know, create fraternity amongst the boys. Follow them on social media. A lot of these kids are so great at social media, and a lot of the masjids are having youth run their social media pages so you can go there and you can find flyers and you can find ways for the students to get it, or the refugees and the foster children to get engaged in the masjid. And I would say, you know, open up that dialogue, get to know the people at the masjid, get to know the board member, like at least one board member who will be able to probably provide you all of that information. Collaboration, religious accommodations, I think we went through. And we have another program about, like specifically about religious accommodations in schools, like what it looks like to accommodate a Muslim in school. That we could probably share those materials out if Shauna thinks that's a good idea, so that you guys can understand like what it looks like for Muslim kids and refugee kids to be accommodated in a public school, especially those public schools where maybe they don't have a large Muslim population. Like, what does that look like? What are their rights, and what can you guys be advocating for them on a public school system? Collaboration with legal sources. So I'm not really sure. I mean, like someone asked, what legal resources are available to caseworkers dealing with complex cases involving the legal rights of Muslim refugee youth? So I know Michigan Immigrant Rights Center does a lot of refugee work. So does Freedom House, and they can probably give you some information about the legal immigration rights and workings, of the refugee children. They could probably provide that resource for you. Care Michigan can always be a resource for you if you have a question about, whether something is like a reasonable religious accommodation, like under the legal guidelines. We will give you a straightforward answer. If somebody's asking for something, then we're like, yeah, that doesn't seem like it's supported. That's just something that they want. We'll tell you that. But if it is something, and we are that resource. We had a college call us yesterday because a teacher told someone they had to take their hijab off to take a test. And the dean was like, that doesn't seem quite right. So they called us. So, we are a resource. We're not, necessarily, people sometimes think we're antagonistic because we make the news when we sue people, but I promise you, we have a much better relationship with most entities and organizations than what the media would have you believe. There's a question in here about trauma-informed cares. And care, that's not something I can talk about. I feel like that's something that comes from a social work aspect, and that might be better for a different thing. But I do know that we have Muslim foster care, and I'm sorry, Muslim social workers and Muslim family services. And maybe if there's something specific where you want to talk about a holistic trauma approach, from a Muslim perspective, maybe Muslim family services could be a resource for you with regards to that. But I don't want to speak to that because I would be probably very ill-equipped to do that. And I don't think that there has been any policy updates from last year that talk about the legal rights of refugee youth that need to be aware of. We're still working under basically the same framework that we were last year. There hasn't been really any kind of like a legal or policy change, not from the state of Michigan, not from the federal government, and not on a case law perspective where, there's some kind of lawsuit that came out. So those are all of the questions that came out, kind of in advance. And I appreciate those and appreciate you guys letting me sit here and talk for 30+ minutes. And I think if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer those questions as well.
Thank you, Amy. That sounds great. We do have a question on the chat here, which is, how do you balance students who are struggling in school and missing Friday classes to attend the mosque?
That's a great idea. So, I mean, that really depends. So if they're struggling in school, so I don't know how long it would take to get to a masjid, right? So if you live in our area and you leave public school to go to the masjid, you're talking about a 5 to 10 minute drive tops, because there's just so much available. And I know in some other part of the states, that's just not the case. So when kids leave the school to go to the masjid around here, they're gone for 45 minutes to an hour or less. They're not taking a half day off school. I just know that that's not feasible. But if somebody's leaving the masjid and they're they have to be doing the work, right? That's a requirement. So they have to be taking the work with them. If they're going to miss a half day because they can't get back, or even if they're missing 1 or 2 classes, they have to get that work. They have to make that work up. I understand, especially with refugees who are probably learning the language. Also, the school is probably going to be a different kind of struggle for them than it is for somebody born here, right, who has at least like a proficiency in the English language. So I know a lot of the masjids around here also have tutoring. Maybe the way to do that is, if they're going to the masjid and they're struggling at school, you can get one of the older kids or a college student from the masjid to tutor them. And even if it's via Zoom, right? Like, look at us, like we're all here, we're all meeting, and we're all in different places. So that's something too, providing them with that extra resource at no cost to anybody. But making sure that they do the work, because they have to be held accountable, and that work is important because that's, you know, a requirement. They have to meet their obligations, like educationally as well as religiously. So that's what I would say.
That's a great, you know, you gave some great options here for kids that are actually struggling. That's, I did get another question sent to me through a foster parent, and their question is, you know, how do you, navigate and how do you help, you know, your foster Muslim child if basically they are asking for more information about your religion and Christianity, and then are telling you that, hey, they would like to be Christian or go to church or, you know, eat the food that, you know, like pork or anything like that. How do you answer that? How do you figure that out with them?
So, I mean, that's a really good question. And a lot of that depends on the age of the child, right? So we know
Yeah.
children are curious and children like to
So
adapt.
9 years old.
Okay, so 9 years old, that's a different kind of conversation because
Mhm.
children are people pleasers. They like to please the people that they're around, and they're also highly influential. It's one of the reasons why when you're in an elementary school, there's no religious talk in elementary school, period. Straight up, period. There's no religious talk at all,
Mhm.
because we know that children of that age are inherently susceptible to influence, right? And I'm not saying somebody's proselytizing to them, but being in the home and things like that, that's a form of proselytization. Like as Muslims, we say that, like, you know, your character sometimes can show a lot about Islam or whatever. So, but if they're 9 years old, like we should be having those conversations with their parents, and you have to address them. Like, this is, you know, this is how you were raised. This is what your parents would decide for you. As you get older, you can do it, and you have to be very cautious about the way that you're speaking about the religion. And I maybe would be having them go to like their own religious leader, like an imam or somebody, and, you know, have those conversations with an imam, as opposed to with somebody who has like limited knowledge of Islam, who probably can't answer the questions about the, if there's some kind of confusion between what Christianity believes and Islam believes, even though we believe a lot of the same things, some things are not the same, that's really addressed better by a religious leader that understands like the religion of the individual, especially when they're so young. So those are conversations that should be taken in a safe space and should be done without undue influence, even accidental undue influence, and really should be handled with the parents of the child at that age and the religious leader of the child at that age, quite honestly.
Thank you, Amy. So their comment is that I did take them for meetings with the imam, so I should not be taking them to church.
You at 9 years old, you should not be taking them to church. No, they don't have the ability. Like there's a lot of choices we don't let 9-year-olds make, right?
Mhm.
We just don't, because they don't have all of the equipment mentally that they need to make those choices. And any amount of influence is still influence, right? So we should not be, especially if they are in contact with their parents and their parents are opposed to it. That's not something, because that's not something that might have been an issue for them had they, not been placed in foster care. So we should not be fostering that should be something that they can, delve in as at a different time when they become more intellectual beings, quite honestly.
So, thank you. Do we have any other questions from our attendees here today? Any other thing that we can take advantage of while Amy's here? Feel free to either put it in the chat, or you can even just, ask her right now. Your audio is on, so you're welcome to do that. But I was just wondering if you would like to ask those questions that you haven't yet, or if, were there any challenges that you ran into in applying any kind of like legal frameworks in support of the Muslim refugee youth in your care? Would you like to share anything, or would you like to add anything, or ask anything that you'd like to? You can put your hands up, or you can just go right ahead as well. Um, I think for a kid struggling in school, I encourage them to go to a second prayer. Yeah, there's so many, right, Amy? I mean, we see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I mean, so
yeah.
some masjids have one prayer, some masjids have two prayers, some masjids have 3 or 4 prayers. So having them go to the latest prayer possible is probably a fabulous idea. Also finding out, like, if there are 5 or 10 high school students, for instance, at one specific high school in an area, that's enough to have a Juma prayer at the school, and working with the school to allow a speaker to come in at the end of the day after school is over as an MSA, like Muslim Student Association event on Fridays. That happens a lot in this area, where we have like the high school my kids go to, it's like there's only like I think 600 kids in the entire high school, and it starts at like 6th grade. So 6th to 8th grade, and like 20% maybe are Muslim. So it's not like a lot of kids, right? But every Friday they invite a different speaker, we call them kitab, to come in. And sometimes the high school kids do it if they have one that has a little bit of knowledge. And they give the talk, and then they lead salah or the prayer at the end, and they do it after school so the kids don't have to miss school. If that is an option, if that's something that you can work with the school, if there's like 10 or so Muslims in the same school, and that's something that they're interested in, that's also another way for them not to get like get out of going to class, and they do it at the end of the day. Like either usually like 15 minutes before the bell rings, or even as the bell rings, depending. In the wintertime, it's usually a little bit before the bell rings because of how our prayers work with regards to the sun, and waiting till after the bell, depending on what time your school gets out, might be a little bit might delay the prayer. But if not, I would work with the school to see that. You can't do it with like 3 or 4 students because it's like there's a requirement to have a certain amount at the prayer, but to make it a formal congregational prayer. But if there's 10 or more students, I would see if the school would be willing to let them do that. And then you can have the kids, like you can put the kids in charge of it and give them some like responsibility, like, okay, you guys are going to have this, but you guys have to invite the speakers and pick the topics and things like that, and give them some ownership over that too.
Absolutely. Great ideas there. Anybody else would like to offer any comments or questions? I do have a poll here for you. I was going to do that at the beginning, but I think it sounds like a good idea to do it now. If you have time, it shouldn't take long. I believe if I launch it, you're able to, take this poll in the chat and quickly. It shouldn't take much longer, but it'd be a great way to get us to understand if we need any more, training or more knowledge in this area. But also feel free to go ahead and ask anything in the chat if you'd like as well. And I also typed in the chat CARE Michigan's website. I hope you saw that. I will also share that with you through email. And this presentation is being recorded, so you'd be able to view it for your, self-knowledge, training purposes, or anything else as well. So I will share a link to the our YouTube channel, which will have this presentation as well. Any other questions? I think I'm giving you time to do that poll. I know that's running in the back there.
Yeah, also, if you go to our website and you do have a specific question, we have an intake form on there. So it's like report an incident, but it's really just an intake form. So you can go there, you can click like report an incident, you can type out your question, and either myself or our executive director or our director of safe spaces will be able to get back to you right away. And it's right on the front page of our webpage.
Excellent. That's great. That's a great resource for us all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've also typed in the website there again for you, for if anyone missed that earlier in the chat. It's caremichigan.org. And Amy's just mentioned they have an intake form for you to ask any questions. Okay, if there is no more questions, we are done. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining MFCA this morning in January. And we hope to have more, workshops like this and similar workshops. And I'll be sending you a survey by email. And you can, respond to that as well and let me know what else you think you'd like to hear from us at our workshops. Thank you. Appreciate you all.
Thank you.
Yep. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the week.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Amy. We really appreciate having you here.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.